Welcome to Cheating Story Lab. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Today's story is about discovering that the family you thought you knew was built on lies that went deeper than I ever imagined. Some betrayals cut so deep that they change who you are forever. I used to believe that love and loyalty were enough to build a family, but I learned the hard way that some people will exploit those very qualities to destroy you from the inside out. My name is Thomas, and this is the story of how my stepson drained my life savings, and how one DNA test in a courtroom exposed 20 years of carefully constructed lies. I met Rebecca when her son Kyle was just 3 years old. She was a single mother working 2 jobs, struggling to make ends meet after what she told me was an abusive relationship with Kyle's father. I was completely smitten with both of them. Rebecca was beautiful, intelligent, and seemed genuinely grateful for the stability I could provide. Kyle was an adorable kid who took to calling me Dad within months. We married when Kyle was 5, and I legally adopted him a year later. Rebecca insisted we make it official, saying she wanted Kyle to have the security of knowing I was truly his father in every way that mattered. I was touched by her request and eager to make our family complete. From that moment on, Kyle was legally my son, and I treated him exactly as I would have treated a biological child. I worked long hours as a mechanical engineer while Rebecca stayed home to raise Kyle. Money was tight in the early years, but I was determined to provide for my family. I started a college fund for Kyle when he was 8 years old, contributing $200 every month without fail. It became an obsession of mine. I wanted to give him every opportunity I'd never had. Kyle was a bright kid, but as he grew older, something changed. He became entitled and demanding, especially about money. When he turned 16, he expected a brand new car. When I bought him a reliable used Honda instead, he threw a tantrum that lasted for weeks. Rebecca always took his side in these conflicts, telling me I was being too harsh or that I didn't understand how important these things were to teenagers. The college fund grew steadily over the years. By the time Kyle was a senior in high school, there was nearly $40,000 saved. I was proud of that accomplishment, proud that I could give my son this head start in life. I had sacrificed vacations, new clothes, even basic luxuries to build that fund. That's when everything started to unravel. Kyle had been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship. Between the scholarship and his college fund, we had his first 2 years completely covered. I was thrilled all those years of saving had paid off. But when I went to transfer the money from the college fund account, I discovered it was empty, completely empty. I called the bank immediately, thinking there had been some kind of error. That's when I learned that Rebecca had been added to the account years earlier as a cosigner, something I had completely forgotten about. The bank records showed that over the past 6 months, the entire $40,000 had been withdrawn in increments of $2,000 to $3,000 each time. When I confronted Rebecca, she broke down crying. She admitted that she had been giving Kyle money throughout high school money for his car payments, insurance, dates, clothes, even a spring break trip I thought his part-time job had paid for. She said he had begged her not to tell me, claiming I would be angry about him needing extra help. "I thought we could replace it before you noticed," she sobbed. Kyle promised he would get a better job and help pay it back. I was devastated, but what broke my heart even more was Kyle's reaction when I spoke to him about it. There was no remorse, no apology. Instead, he shrugged and said, "It's not like it. It was really your money anyway. You were going to give it to me eventually." That attitude shocked me to my core. This was the boy I had raised, the son I had loved and sacrificed for. Where had I gone wrong? The financial situation was catastrophic. I had to take out a second mortgage on our house to cover Kyle's college expenses. At 52 years old, I was suddenly drowning in debt that I had never planned for. My retirement savings took a massive hit as I tried to keep our family afloat. Kyle went off to college that fall, and I hoped that maybe the responsibility of higher education would mature him. Instead, things got worse. He would call home demanding money for textbooks, lab fees, dormitory expenses that weren't covered by his meal plan. Every conversation became a negotiation, with Kyle growing increasingly hostile when I couldn't immediately send whatever amount he requested. Meanwhile, my marriage with Rebecca deteriorated rapidly. The financial stress was enormous, but what really damaged us was her continued defense of Kyle's behavior. She insisted that I was being too hard on him, that college was expensive, and we needed to support our son. When I pointed out that Kyle showed no gratitude or respect for the sacrifices we were making, she accused me of being resentful and petty. The breaking point came during Kyle's sophomore year. He called on a Tuesday night, drunk and belligerent, demanding that I send him $1,500 immediately. When I asked what it was for, he became abusive, screaming that I was a terrible father and that he wished Rebecca had never married me. The call ended with him shouting, "You're not even my real dad anyway." That phrase haunted me for days. Something about the way he said it, the venom in his voice, made me start questioning things I had never questioned before. I began to think back to Rebecca's stories about Kyle's biological father. She had always been vague about the details, claiming the relationship was too painful to discuss. She said his name was Brandon, that he had been abusive, and that he had disappeared when she told him she was pregnant. But now I started noticing inconsistencies in her story. Sometimes she said Brandon was a construction worker, other times she mentioned him being in the military. The timeline of their relationship never quite added up either. When I tried to bring up these discrepancies, Rebecca would become emotional and accuse me of not trusting her. The doubt was eating me alive. I decided to do something I had never imagined I would do. I contacted a private investigator. I told myself I just wanted to understand Kyle's family medical history, that it was important information to have. But deep down, I think I knew I was looking for something much more significant. The investigator's findings shattered my world completely. There was no record of anyone named Brandon matching Rebecca's descriptions in the area during the time she claimed they were together. But there was something else. Rebecca had been married to someone else when Kyle was born. His name was Mitchell Stevens, and he was very much alive, living about 2 hours away with his wife and 3 other children. The investigator had done more digging. Mitchell Stevens was a successful real estate developer worth several $1,000,000. He had been paying child support for Kyle for years, support that Rebecca had never mentioned to me. The payments had stopped when I legally adopted Kyle, but the investigator found records indicating that Mitchell had tried to maintain contact with his son for years before finally giving up. I was shattered. Everything about my family, my marriage, my role as Kyle's father had been built on lies. Rebecca had manipulated me into adopting Kyle not out of love, but to secure financial stability while cutting off Kyle's access to his wealthy biological father. When Kyle came home for winter break, I confronted both of them with the evidence. Rebecca's reaction was immediate and desperate. She broke down completely, begging me not to destroy our family over ancient history. Kyle's reaction was very different. When he learned that his real father was wealthy, his attitude changed instantly. "So you're telling me I have a rich dad who's been kept away from me my whole life?" he said, staring at Rebecca with something close to hatred. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" It was then that I realized Kyle's anger wasn't about the lies or the betrayal. It was about money. He felt he had been denied. The boy I had raised for 18 years was only upset that he might have had access to more resources than I could provide. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Kyle immediately contacted Mitchell Stevens and began building a relationship with his biological father. Rebecca oscillated between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for destroying our family with my obsession with the past. But Kyle wasn't finished with me yet. In February, he came home with a legal demand. He wanted me to pay for the remaining 2 years of his college expenses, claiming that since I had legally adopted him, I was still financially responsible for his education. When I refused, pointing out that he now had access to his wealthy biological father, he threatened to sue me. "You took on the legal obligation when you adopted me," he said with cold calculation. "That doesn't just disappear because you don't like me anymore." I consulted with a lawyer who gave me devastating news. Kyle was technically correct. As his legal adoptive father, I could still be held financially responsible for certain obligations, including educational expenses that had been established before he reconnected with his biological father. The lawsuit Kyle filed against me was humiliating and financially catastrophic. He was demanding not just the remaining college costs, but reimbursement for the emotional distress of being deceived about his parentage and punitive damages for what his lawyer called alienation of affection from his biological father. The case dragged on for months, draining what little savings I had left on legal fees. Kyle played the victim perfectly in depositions, claiming that I had manipulated Rebecca into keeping him away from his real father, and that my discovery of the truth was just an attempt to avoid my financial responsibilities to him. But I had one card left to play, something Kyle and Rebecca didn't know I had done. Months earlier, when I first began to suspect the truth, I had secretly obtained DNA samples and had them tested. I had Kyle's DNA from a hair sample I collected from his hairbrush, and I had obtained my own sample, of course. The results confirmed what I expected. Kyle was not my biological son. But I had also obtained Rebecca's DNA from her hairbrush, and I had requested additional testing. What I discovered was something that would change everything. Kyle wasn't Mitchell Stevens' son either. The DNA showed that Kyle's father was actually Rebecca's brother-in-law, her sister's husband, Greg. Rebecca had been having an affair with Greg during her marriage to Mitchell, and Kyle was the result. Mitchell had been paying child support for 18 years for a boy who wasn't his son either. Rebecca had been lying to everyone. She had manipulated Mitchell into believing Kyle was his child, then manipulated me into adopting Kyle and taking on financial responsibility, all while covering up the fact that Kyle's real father was someone who could never publicly acknowledge him without destroying his marriage to Rebecca's sister. I kept this information secret until the day of our court hearing. Kyle was confident, almost smug as he sat with his lawyer. Rebecca looked nervous but supportive. They had no idea what was coming. When my lawyer stood up to present our defense, he began by submitting the DNA evidence that proved I was not Kyle's biological father. Kyle's lawyer objected, claiming that biological parentage was irrelevant since I had legally adopted him. But then my lawyer dropped the real bombshell. He presented the additional DNA evidence showing that Kyle wasn't Mitchell Stevens' son either, and revealed the true identity of Kyle's biological father. The courtroom went completely silent. Rebecca's face turned white as she realized what was happening. Kyle looked confused at first, then horrified as the implications sank in. The judge reviewed the DNA evidence carefully, then looked up at Kyle with something like pity. "Young man," he said, "it appears that your entire case is built on fraudulent representations made by your mother. Not only is the defendant not your biological father, but the man you believe to be your biological father isn't either. Your mother has perpetrated a fraud on both men, on you, and now on this court." Kyle's lawyer immediately moved for a recess, but the damage was done. The judge continued, "Furthermore, the evidence suggests that your mother's deception has been ongoing for over 20 years, causing significant financial and emotional harm to multiple parties." The judge dismissed Kyle's case entirely and ordered him to pay my legal costs. But that wasn't the end of it. Mitchell Stevens, who had been subpoenaed to testify, immediately filed his own lawsuit against Rebecca for 18 years of fraudulent child support payments. Rebecca's sister, Greg's wife, filed for divorce when the truth came out. Greg himself was forced to admit paternity and take financial responsibility for Kyle, something that destroyed his career and his finances. Kyle's world collapsed overnight. Mitchell stopped all financial support immediately. Greg, now facing his own financial ruin, couldn't provide the wealthy lifestyle Kyle had been expecting. Rebecca, facing multiple lawsuits and public humiliation, had a complete mental breakdown. In the end, Kyle ended up dropping out of college and moving back home with Rebecca. They're both struggling financially now, with no one left to manipulate or exploit. Mitchell recovered the money he could through legal action, but I never saw a penny of the $40,000 Kyle and Rebecca had stolen from the college fund. As for me, I'm slowly rebuilding my life. The house had to be sold to pay off the debts they created, but I'm renting a small apartment and focusing on my career. At 54, I'm starting over, but I'm finally free from the lies and manipulation that defined 20 years of my life. The hardest part isn't the financial loss, or even the betrayal, it's grieving for the son I thought I had. Kyle was never the boy I believed I was raising. The love, the sacrifice, the pride I felt watching him grow up, all of it, was based on a fiction that Rebecca created and maintained through decades of careful lies. Sometimes people ask me if I regret adopting Kyle or if I wish I had discovered the truth sooner. The answer is complicated. Those 20 years weren't entirely meaningless. I did love that little boy, even if he was never really mine. But I also know that Rebecca used my love to exploit me, and that Kyle learned to see me as nothing more than a source of financial support. The truth, as painful as it was, finally set me free. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. If you're watching this and you've been in a similar situation, know that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. It might take years, and it might be devastating when it does, but living a lie is never sustainable forever. Trust your instincts, ask the hard questions, and don't let anyone convince you that love means accepting deception. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.